Another possible explanation is this idea that there's been a long-term program to acclimatize the public to the idea that we are being visited by, alien spacecraft and alien beings. And I think any halfway objective person who's been around a while, now I'm 66 years old, so I know what the thinking was like before MJ-12 and after MJ-12. And when the MJ-12 documents appeared on the UFO scene, it was like a hydrogen bomb being dropped on the UFO community.
Oh, yes.
And since Roswell and since other things that have come out in the 80s and 90s since then, the mentality of the public now is completely different than it was in the 70s and the 60s. And I think any objective person would have to admit that the public is much more accepting of the idea now.
Well, Tom, it really is, because I started my broadcast career in the mid-'70s, and it was started out because I thought I was going to be working in a top 40 station, but the time I got moved there and the time I walked into my top 40 show, I was informed it is now a talk radio show, and I got to choose the subject, either political, and I chose, the paranormal, kind of, and that has stuck with me all through the years, doing paranormal shows. But, I'll be honest with you, in the 70s, if you went around and talked about UFOs, people would look at you really strange. They would talk to you, but you could see their expression on their face like they would think you're crazy. They wouldn't come out and say, hey, you're crazy, but they kind of would step back from you, and you could tell, hey, they're thinking, I'm crazy. And that kind of stuck around pretty much all the way through the 80s, all the way up, I would say, to the mid-90s. And then it started changing in the mid-90s where, people would say, well, I saw a UFO. And then people would say, well, hey, tell me about it. They weren't, like, this guy is nuts, And that's when I started seeing the change. But one thing, Tom, you have to realize, okay, we're a planet. Every day there seem like they're finding other galaxies, other solar systems, other planets that maybe could hold life. Are we the only ones out of all these galaxies, all these solar systems that have life that's capable of, building a house or building a skyscraper or building a UFO? I really think that we would be really naive if we think that we're the only one that has the intelligence. I just can't buy that.
Oh, right. And even a few decades ago, there were scientists that were insisting that there was no evidence that there was any other life in the universe, any other intelligent life in the universe but us. But you look at the universe, and there are so many trillions of stars. There are more stars in the universe than there are grains of sand on the beaches.
Oh, yeah.
And so we would have to be living, in terms of even just any kind of life, we'd have to be living in the most statistically weird universe imaginable for us to be the only ones with intelligent life. Now, then you get into the question, how are they going to get here? And the skeptics and debunkers operate out of the principle, well, they can't get here, so there can't be any UFOs. But that gets into the question of, well, how much do we really know? Because if I took this iPhone that I'm talking on right now, if I could somehow go back in time and show it to Leonardo da Vinci, he wouldn't have any idea how it could work. So I think there's a lot that we don't know. There are probably breakthroughs in physics, possibly in consciousness, that may occur at some time in the future, and maybe we'll get closer to understanding this.
I feel, honestly, we just simply can't comprehend it. Everybody sits there and watches, like Star Trek and all these different movies, right? How aliens supposed to look. We don't even honestly comprehend what an alien might look like. Do they look like us? Do they think like us? Do they still have the morals we have? I don't think so. And that's what I try to, explain to the listeners on here. If you think aliens are here to serve mankind, I think they're here to serve themselves, number one. Otherwise, we wouldn't have all these abductions that's going on. And I do believe people are being abducted. I do believe people are being taken off and never returned. I think people are being mutilated the same way that cattle have been. Now, some of it I think are farce, maybe by the military, to keep the community confused. But, we just can't. The whole problem is we can't comprehend it. The same thing like you're talking about an iPhone. You don't have to go back that far. You can go back in the 20s and they couldn't comprehend what an iPhone is or anything like what we have. Even a transistor radio, they would go crazy. They'd lock you up and think you're whatever. That shows you how far we have advanced. I mean, if you go to the 1880s, they wouldn't even know what an airplane was. How far have we advanced? Our technology, we just don't understand what maybe is out there and what is capable of things being out there. And that's what we have to keep an open mind and not think of that in our logic, what things are like.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you. I couldn't agree with you more, Gary. And I'll tell you one thing. I draw an analogy with the time of the Black Plague in the 14th century, and the analogy that I'm drawing is that you had this phenomenon, you had this problem of this disease that was decimating the population, and that when you think about the explanations that people had for the disease, it arose completely out of their worldview, and that was the medieval worldview that was run out of the church, and that God was in control. God rewarded and punished man for his virtues and his sins, and there were people believing that God was punishing mankind in some way or another for their sins, or there were explanations that the Jews were poisoning the wells, etc., etc. And what I'm getting at is that their explanations were obviously totally, completely wrong, and it was another 500 years before we even began to get to the point to where we could understand what was causing the Black Plague, because they didn't, in the Middle Ages, they didn't have microscopes, they didn't have the germ theory of disease, they didn't have the scientific method. There are so many more things that they needed, more steps that had to be taken for them to begin to understand the phenomenon. And when I look at the UFO phenomenon today, I'm starting to wonder if we're not in the same position, that we just don't have the knowledge, we don't have the breakthroughs, we don't have the progress in understanding some of the fundamentals of how our universe works to begin to understand what is really going on.
You know, you're one of the first persons that actually worded it that way, because, you know, I get so many people on and they don't even comprehend what you just said. And they probably wouldn't comprehend what you just said, to be honest with you. I just look at, you know, it comes down to how would you know what an alien would look like, why they would be coming here, how they would get here, how did they go through time, or did they go through portals, or do they come from a universal, whatever. We can't comprehend it. Let's be honest with it. You can't comprehend. But we do know something is going on. Just the other day on the news, I was reading, they're picking up radio waves now, which are unlike any other radio waves. They're not, you know, sounding like a dead star giving off radio waves. Maybe for once they're actually detecting a civilization out there, because these radio waves are coming, signals are changing, and they're, you know, in not just repeating themselves. Yeah.
And I know they've been doing that a long time, you know, the SETI thing, and more power to them. I hope that all of that work bears fruit. I know for a long time it hasn't really seemed to have borne fruit. One way I look at it, Gary, is that if you can build a quadrant, and on one side of it you have what you know, and the other side of it is what you don't know. And there's you know that you know that you don't know that you know, and you don't know that you don't know. Now that's the blind spot. And after 70 years of UFO investigations, a lot of people are really frustrated that we don't have definitive answers to this problem. But what that tells me, and should tell us, is that we have a huge blind spot here. We don't even know what it is that we don't know yet.
And that's the scary part right there. We don't know. And if we are being visited by whatever, what are they visiting us for? Are they visiting us for our minerals on our planet? Are they, you know, maybe wanting to take over our planet at one point? Who knows? and we can speculate, What I don't like is when I get a guest on and it says, hey, we're being visited by UFOs. The aliens are here to save mankind. They give off orbs of love. When I hear that, I want to go to the bathroom and vomit. I'll be honest with you.
Yeah. But I think we can infer certain things from the abduction reports. And, for example, we've gotten some kind of an idea what some of these entities may look like, the grays. And there have been human-like entities reported. There have been insect-like entities reported. There have been reptilian types. So we're getting some kind of an idea of what some of these people may look like. But the other aspect of it is there are, at a minimum, several groups, assuming that we are being visited, there are several groups involved, and they may be operating separately. Some of them may be acting in concert, or maybe they're all a federation and they're working together. But what you said earlier, Gary, is so true, and that is they're not here for our purposes. They're here for their purposes.
Well, that's what I tell people. When I get somebody on and says they're here to serve man, I said, okay, but if they are abducting people, right, and experimenting on them, if you took somebody down the street, right, and you took them into your apartment and all of a sudden you decided you were going to take their DNA, you're going to take blood from them, what's going to happen to you? You're going to go to prison for the rest of your life. Now, whatever they're here, they don't care about our morals or whatever. So whatever they're doing to us is they're not looking at our human society. Whatever they're doing is gathering information for themselves. And even if people are being implanted, not implanted, I've seen pictures, credible pictures from somebody I know used to be with the government of human mutilations. And when you see something like that, you don't sleep for a couple of days afterwards. Far worse than cattle mutilations. And that, believe me, that is going on. And the FBI report how many people are missing out of this country every year with no record, no trace. Makes me wonder, we can't have that many serial killers walking the streets. Something is happening to these people. You don't drive to Safeway down the street and then just vanish. I mean, things are going on. And I feel like we're not being told that. Now, what I'm really upset, going back about 6-7 months ago, there was all this major talk. There's certain people that were so convinced there was going to be major disclosure about UFOs and aliens. Well, I'll be honest with you. I haven't seen that. I haven't seen anything I haven't seen since 1976 when I started in radio. It's kind of like the same repeat of the same stuff. I don't know how you feel about it.
Well, I think that there has been a shift in the communication pattern with a small segment of the government and with some of the major media. And, of course, we're referring to TTSA and all these developments. But I believe that what it's amounted to at this point is what I call soft confirmation. And soft confirmation is when a communication occurs that basically signals it's okay to think that this is true. Okay. Now, hard confirmation is the Secretary of Defense holding a news conference and saying we have UFO videos, we have UFOs on radar, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's what I call hard confirmation. And soft disclosure is possibly one form of it, are these questionable documents that have been introduced into the public domain over all these years. But hard disclosure is putting the saucer in the bodies in the Washington Mall and letting the masses file past. Okay, that's real disclosure.
I think so. I think it's, and the thing is that what little disclosure is happening. Okay, the same amount of new disclosures come out. It's been a lot of the opposite coming out to make you wonder what's going on. And I don't want to bring up the Space Force, but the government, the president and the vice president creating, which is supposed to go in effect this Friday, the Space Force. Why all of a sudden has that been brought up? And started here this past year. it's making me kind of wonder, like, is something going on that the government is not telling us? Or is it something that they will drop a bombshell on us when something